And we are live with another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart. Today, I will have a great guest. I'll have Catherine Bellinger, who's co-founder of Students for Education Reform, which seems like a million years ago. But since then, within a decade, she has had many different roles and capacities within education advocacy and education philanthropy. Probably has a long view on some of the hits and the misses, some of the things that we've done well and some of the things we have not done well in education advocacy and where we should go now. I think this is a conversation we need to have because a lot of what we do in education is becoming stale. A lot of what we do in education advocacy is just tired. It's just over. We should start fresh on some of it. Before I bring Catherine in, though, I just wanted to do a quick kind of share of the outrage of the day for me. Man, listen, things are going into Stupidville when it comes to public education. So I got this yesterday. It's from the World Socialist website, which is basically better titled the Teachers Union. They have something here from the stories in California about the Los Angeles and Oakland teachers reaching a vote of no on reopening public schools, even though parents want schools reopened, governors want schools reopened, science wants schools reopened, God wants schools reopened, but unions don't. So because they don't, they have this really clever way of making it about safety. And the headline on this is Los Angeles and Oakland teachers vote no on the deadly deals to reopen schools. I think this vote is still in progress. I don't think it's a done deal yet, but it says West Coast educators, rank and file safety committees call for Los Angeles and Oakland teachers to vote no on their union sellout agreements and refuse to return to classrooms until conditions are completely safe. The efforts of the politicians and teachers unions across the West Coast to return students and staff to schools under deadly conditions must be resisted in order to save lives. Now, I want to be clear about this. You know, the socialist wing of the education unions are the ones who get out in the streets with T-shirts and yell all kinds of things about billionaires taking over the schools and neoliberalism, and they drive a lot of the union activity. So when they do things like this, they put out these type of calls, it drives their unions to go left, to go hard left, and to be resistant almost to everything. We need to be sick of this and tired of this. The children of Los Angeles and Oakland deserve an education. And for the last year, they've had somewhere in the neighborhood of an hour to an hour and a half of daily instruction, a lot of which is not synchronous, meaning they're not looking at a live teacher. They're looking at a teacher's set of assignments for them to go out and complete by watching videos on their own, by searching out information on their own, which means that a lot of kids haven't been taught for over a year. It's time to get back. It's time to stop the teachers from running the show and public employees. And the last thing I'll say here about this particular story is that they said part of their pitch and appeal is to tell government entities that you can't make us be essential employees. We're not essential employees, which is one of the first times in the history of education since I've been alive that I've heard teachers say, we're not essential. We're not, remember all that stuff we used to say about how, all of civilization is from teachers, comes from teachers. And no, not anymore, dude. We're not that anymore. So let's just keep these kids schools closed, and let's just keep getting 100% of our paychecks for about 8% of our performance. It's not going to work anymore. I think America, I think teachers, I think most people are sick of your shit. Knock it off, teachers. That's my outrage of the day. I'm going to bring in my guest today, who is Catherine Bellinger from Washington, D.C. Catherine, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Chris.
What do you think about this story that I just talked about? What do you think about this, school closing and all that, the teachers not essential?
It is ridiculous. When I was working at IDEA in Texas, we were able to open our schools up, and I think our teachers are really proud to be educating our kids in school every day. So it's a shame to see the teachers union, one, trying to speak for all teachers like that. I'm sure there are some who want to get back in the classroom. And I also think teachers are certainly essential to children learning.
Yeah. So you either have to pick one. You either have to say we're really important and you guys should respect us and pay us well, or you have to say, yeah, we're not so essential. So if things go bad, find another way.
Yep.
I noticed somebody in my Twitter feed earlier today mentioned Reagan. Years ago, Reagan, when he came into office, the air traffic controllers were very much like teachers. And it was assumed that everybody knew that air traffic controllers were essential. But they went on strike and he fired them all and replaced them with a whole new crew of things. And that was like a shockwave across America, because it was like, wait, what do you mean you just fired the air traffic controllers? Well, we can fire them and get some new ones. Well, that's where I think we are with teachers unions, not necessarily with teachers, but with unions. But that's not what I brought you on to talk about today. Listen, I wanted you to bring you on. I've called you my wonderkind friend for years. Like, I think mentorship goes 3 or 4 different directions. I think that older people are seen as wise and seen as like they should have lots of information. But in truth, we grow stale in our knowledge of things. And the only way that we stay alive is by having mentorship of people younger than ourselves to kind of refresh our knowledge and our ideas. I'm in a period with Unpublic of wanting to refresh a little bit, wanting to tap into some newer blood and energy and see what's wrong with our thinking. What's the gap? You are a perfect person, I think, to do that, because you have done so much in 10 years, more than 10 years. I'm sure we go back more than 10 years. I want to say it's about 10 though. And I have watched you grow from the co-founder of Students for Education Reform, and since then just take many different paths with a very steady course though. Like you completely did more and more and more and more, and you've learned more and more and more about advocacy, about schools, about how the bifurcation between traditional public schools and charter schools plays out in reality and policy. So I want to ask you, kind of just maybe let's start with where you are now in your thinking about all this work that we do in advocacy. Do you think we're getting it right? Do you think we're getting it wrong? Do you think we should change course? Where are you?
Well, that's a big question.
No.
I was thinking about that this weekend, because I was thinking, what did I think about education advocacy 12 years ago when I was just starting SFR. So one, I think better people like us who are fighting for parents and families and students to be in control and be in the driver's seat for their education. I think we are, we've learned a lot in, 12 years. I certainly have. And I think education advocacy, educational equity and excellence advocacy is in a better place today than it was, what I call race to the top era. I think that I see a lot less sort of arrogance and sort of certainty about, what works and like, this fits into the strategic plan and this doesn't. Today I see a lot more, progress when it comes toward putting, funding people and listening to people who are actually parents and, Black and brown and live in the communities that want, better options and choices in schools. So that's the positive. I think where we still have so much more work to do is, I think people like me who have sort of the privilege of already having a good education and having a, well-paying job and being able to like hang out on Twitter, I still see a lot of navel gazing, maybe more navel gazing, like, and so in some ways I think that like I see a lot, like the last couple of years, there's been a lot of like, is is the education reform movement, is it a movement? Is it reform? Should we call it something else? Like, it's like, well, okay, what about the actual thing of like, are parents able to access good schools for their kids? Are students able to are students loving school? Like, so there's been just a lot of like, especially the Trump era was so awful. I think all Democrats sort of, we'd gotten complacent during the Obama, era a little bit. And I kind of wish I could say that in the 4 years of Trump, it like we regrouped and like came back stronger. I think we're still in the like, what the heck just happened phase.
Yeah, I feel like when you say these questions that we had about are we a movement or not, I've been in so many discussions over the years where it's like, is the education movement, are we really a movement? Are we an ecosystem? Are we, there's like these different things. And I would always say like, listen, number one, I don't care, but number two, movements have shared values, shared purpose, and people rowing in the same direction because it's like part of their own self-interest to do so. Like movements have self-interest. People are fighting for their own freedom. So no, we're not a movement. Education reform is a confederation of similar people doing common activities, but that's different than a movement. But I like the way you just framed that. Beside, like, okay, that's a great conversation to have, but our kids are getting in great schools. Are they getting a great education? Are they graduating? Are they better off because this has all happened? I love what you say about the Trump era too. What do you think about, I mean, I feel like Obama was the golden age of many of the things that the so-called education reform movement or whatever wanted, because it was bipartisan in a lot of cases. And it wasn't as much of a fight. But when Trump came in, I remember a lot of people on the right, to the right of me saying, okay, now you guys sit down and shut up. We got this. Like school choice is about to rain from the sky. Like vouchers are about to like be sent into every family in the mail. Just
like
wait,
the golden ticket in Willy Wonka.
Right. Yeah. Like he was literally the golden ticket. The Trump ticket is here. So y'all just sit down, stop talking about all that social justice stuff and turning people off. And here we are, like, 4 years later, and I'm like wondering what just happened. It's almost like getting mugged. Like all of our best stuff was kind of just salvaged. I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so, I vote Democrat. I mostly identify as a Democrat. Democratic Party drives me insane. I'm certainly very liberal.
Yeah.
But I'm also not so partisan that if for 4 years, if like, if that had actually happened and like parents, we're getting like a full, however much the public school system spends per kid, the government spends per kid, if parents were just getting handed that in all 50 states and like there was this massive like golden ticket, like I would have gotten kind of excited about that. But like what the promise of like school choice is going to rain from the sky, I did not see that happening. The federal charter schools program, the Trump budget zeroed it out and was doing like a massive consolidation of education programs. So where are we now? I feel like a lot of folks who want to do good things for kids are feeling a little politically homeless, and like, who are my people? Like the Obama era, it was like, these are my people. And, or at least you could point to, all these, champions. And I think now it's sort of like, okay, well, I love what the Biden administration is doing on, stimulus checks. I love the bipartisan, Romney and Michael Bennett supporting a child care credit. Where is that? Like, I would love to see that for education. The way that like, we know that parents are going to be getting checks if they have kids at home. I would love a bipartisan consensus on, giving parents and families and students a lot more power for education.
You know, when I met you years ago, I think one of the first things that we did together, you brought me in as a keynote speaker to ESFR down in New Orleans. And I remember it was like a great time because I hadn't been to New Orleans in years. And it was like one of my first keynoting of anything and being invited somewhere to keynote. So I just thought like, wow, this is like really cool, you know, and it was all young people. It's all students. It's all college students. So I thought, man, this is the movement we need. It's young people taking an interest in education. And I remember giving the keynote to you all about, we were blocks away from some of the schools I went to in New Orleans that were just complete crap schools. And the adults in my lives didn't even know that they were crap schools because they had always been, you know, they were fixtures of the community, but nobody had ever really challenged them or whatever. But it seemed so much clearer to me then that the idea was we needed quality teachers, we needed new schools, we needed new opportunities for kids and choices for communities that didn't have any, and we needed outcomes. Like we needed to focus on outcomes rather just than inputs. All of that seemed so clear then. Doesn't seem so clear anymore. I wonder what happened. Do you have any idea, like where did it go that we were clear and now we're not?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the clarity was, you know, the clarity then of great teachers, choices for kids and families, caring about outcomes. You know, it came at a moment where there was that bipartisan agreement. You know, I think that we got people, you know, who are advocates and policymakers, you know, got sort of beat up a little and had some losses and also made some mistakes. It was almost like, okay, we had the vision, great teachers, and then you know, we like tried to go and pass, you know, teacher evaluation laws in every state, like that was going to be the magic wand. And then I think, you know, people rightly learned some lessons of like, they're not, you know, rewriting the teacher evaluation law, like it might be necessary, but not sufficient. And it's not this magic wand. And so then I think, you know, it caused a lot of, you know, the questioning of like, were we right on the vision? I actually think like every kid having access to a great teacher, whether that is at home in a homeschool or like in a pod or in a great teachers in charter schools, great teachers in traditional public schools, like that should still be part of the vision. I think that the lack of clarity today, you know, is from a lot of these losses and maybe a little more humility. But we should also still like, we had this value at ESFR. I don't know if it's still, ESFR had a core values statement. And one of them was audacity and humility. And it wasn't separate. It was the same audacity and humility. And what I wonder is in 12 years, I do think a positive is like, advocates, you know, like me are a lot more humble, but I also think we can't lose the audacity. And like maybe what you felt 10 years ago in that like room of 18 and 19-year-olds was, you know, a lot of audacity.
But what's the humility for? I keep hearing this all the time, and for a few years now, we should be more humble. We should be more humble. Tell me about what's the humility, God damn it. Listen, I don't think anybody ever went to civil rights people and said we need to be humble about the fact that people should be able to sit in the front of the bus. We should be humble about the fact that people should not be put in jail for voting, right? Like we should be humble. What the hell? Audacity. Yeah. Like, listen, if you're coming to save my black ass and I'm in a burning building, I don't want any humble people coming for me. I actually want firefighters. I want people who understand what a fire is and run into the house and grab people and pull them out. Is that wrong? Is that not being humble?
That is sort of when I say navel gazing, like that is where it's come like too far. I mean, look, I think so right now I'm advising a philanthropist, and I do think that like there are certainly like times and rooms where like part of humility means, listening to other people, asking questions, not just like, it's not just me and, my boss like going into like a corner and like deciding what is good for people. So like you should, have an element of humility about like not knowing all the answers. But one of the answers, that you don't have to be humble about is like every kid deserves a great education, and that shouldn't be dependent on their income or their race.
Or where they live, their geography, anything. Yeah. I mean, those are the things that I thought that we agreed on before, was that demography is not destiny. Like, we had these little sayings that very clearly just basically said, you should get a good education. In the richest country in the world, you should be able to get a good education. You should be able to have access to one. You shouldn't be zoned in to just kind of like, like exile, like knowing if you go to that school over there, you're probably going to come out less competitive and your life's going to be different than if you went to this school over here. Were you ever prepared for the amount of resistance that there would be to some ideas like that? Like, to just, we need good schools, we need better schools, we need great teachers. Were you prepared when you started out with ESFR?
No, not at all. I didn't even fully see it until I started doing really local work in the District of Columbia. When people to my face sat down with me and explained to me that every school was a good school, and every teacher was a good teacher. And here in DC, every high school was a great high school. And the fact that like one high school, almost 100% of the kids were going off to college, and another high school, like, 6% of the kids were proficient in reading. That wasn't because of any variation in school quality. That was just like, parents and kids and poverty and violence and the community. And what we just needed to do was, quote, invest. And it wasn't really until I started doing local work in DC that I realized how deep-seated this liberal, it is sort of like it's like kind of a white liberal thing, belief that like, while saying every kid needs a good school, implies that there are bad schools, and like there are no bad schools. I'm like, what are you on?
Yeah. Like, are you paying attention to the schools around you? DC has been one of the more heavy choice markets for a long time too, though. I think people have taken it for granted there locally, how much choice there was. And there, because of that choice, there were many people that were already in a good enough school that they could be resistant about other people having good schools. And you guys are DC is a huge private school market. So you have a lot of people who are talking about the schools who aren't even in any of them. They're in the private schools, right? Yeah. So they can be more resistant from that vantage point. Am I remembering this right, that you did some work in New Orleans, or you lived in New Orleans for a while when you were doing some of the work?
I did. I lived in New Orleans for about 6 months, only because I was dating someone there. But
did you learn anything locally about their kind of community issues, like the pushback and the resistance from the communities there on? I mean, listen, they're one of the most famous reform markets in the country. And I seem to remember there were like lots of people taking bruisings on their stuff they did there.
Yeah, I wasn't active working in, education advocacy in New Orleans, but, definitely saw that in DC. Also, when I was at IDEA, saw it in Austin, Texas. If anyone thinks there's pushback to like the idea of a kid going to a great school, or like having a choice, if anyone thinks there's pushback in their city, like go to Austin. The more liberal the city, the more, people are wedded to the idea every public school in the district is great. It's all perfect. Really?
I'm weirded out by Texas a little bit when it comes to charter schools, for instance, because they seem to be, it's a red state, mostly, I guess. They are not a teachers union stronghold that I know of. Maybe they are. I don't think so. But they have like really pronounced anti-charter school sentiments in Texas. Where the hell does that come from?
It is built into the traditional school district ecosystem, and actually like the funding. I wasn't familiar with, I'd heard of, I was familiar with teachers unions, gone up against them, occasionally agreed with them on issues like, school funding. But I was unaware of the like network of associations. So there's like in Texas, there's like the Principals Association, there's the School Boards Association, there's the School Administrators Association. So I don't know the difference between principal and school administrator, but they have different associations. There's the School Business Officers Association. Like everyone has an association, and all of those associations are funded in part through like the state and local per pupil funding for public education. So why is there so much opposition to charter schools? Well, in Texas, charter schools educate 6% of kids. And there are 3.2, I think, million school children in Texas. So all of those, dollars for, traditional public schools, some of which are doing good, some of which aren't, a lot of inequities. Some of that is getting like skimmed to go straight toward what actually my colleague Starlee Coleman in Texas calculated as 185 million in lobbying against charter schools.
Wow.
Annually.
Wow. In one state.
And the budget, the dues for the state charter association, their budget, just, to Starlee's credit, she's gotten it to a really strong place, but it's like we are dwarfed by sort of the blob. That's also what I want to bring back, by the way. Like there was, like I was just thinking about like what is the bad guy, and like everyone wants good schools for kids. Sometimes people like who are love to talk about comms and messaging will say like, well, we'll be more effective if we have a bad guy. But like, we can't say that the bad guy is the traditional districts or like local public schools, because some of them are good, which is true. Like, so we don't really have a bad guy. Is the bad guy low expectations? Like, yes, the bad guy's low expectations, but like, it's like the blob.
Yeah.
That 155 million that's getting like taken away from parents, from actual education to go toward lobbying, taxpayer-funded lobbying for against choice.
Well, I will make no doubt about it. I believe that the public education employee associations and unions and their associated unions and associations, like you've mentioned them, there are associations that defend superintendents, school boards, teachers unions and teachers, and various other interest groups within public education, like janitors and aides and others. Collectively, that group of people has a deep vested interest in everything staying the same. So we have to be like intelligent people. Like we can't like keep dancing around. No, we're all in the same boat together. No, we're not in the same boat together. Let's just be very clear about it. Our kids are not all in the same boat. Our kids are in very different boats. And all those people I just mentioned, by the way, they're the first people to get their kids into safe harbor of better schools than the ones they work at. So let's just stop, stop trying to put lipstick on it. It's like putting the bonnet on the bulldog. We just know these people are literally vested in kids staying in the same place. Texas is just weird to me because it's supposed to be a more conservative place. I visited, you mentioned Starlee. She had us down there for a thing, for a keynote. And it was just amazing to me. Like things like Pastors for Texas Children is a group of pastors that literally don't want any choice. And I can't.
They're like, God says no choice.
No choice. God wants you to stay in godless schools. Like my back and forth as a Christian, my back and forth with them has been tell me the theology that supports your position, or else I'm going to call you a union front group with the word pastors, and that you are misusing God's name, because everything in the Bible around education is about bringing children into Christian education, like getting them a Christian education. You don't have to be a believer of that. But it's there in the book called the Bible that, like, reportedly is a user manual for Christianity. So if you are the pastors for education or pastors for Texas children, you don't want children to learn Jesus. You want them to go to schools. God told us that. Now I know for sure that we're talking to different gods, because God never told me anything about making sure our kids go to secular schools only with no choice of anything else. But anyways, it's just one of those things about Texas I haven't been able to understand, but now they're exporting, Catherine. They're exporting. That group now is going to Oklahoma and Kentucky and I believe Florida.
Chris, I'm so glad you said that, because we're talking about, like, okay, we need more audacity. Like, we need a little more fire and energy in our belly for education advocacy. We need to stop doing the navel gazing. The national teachers unions are so good at, like, exporting their good ideas. Pastors for Texas children. What a brilliant idea.
Right.
I mean, if I wanted to stop families from being able to access a choice for their kids, what a perfect sort of Trojan horse into so many different communities in Texas, especially in a red state. Like, so of course they're exporting it to Oklahoma. Yeah, I would export it to Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, like, and so my, question is, like, when someone does something really groundbreaking, that is helping kids, what are we doing to fight for exporting that and copying that in a good way to help kids in another state?
I mean, I love what you said. I'm going to make note of this. Is one way of losing the battle is forgetting who the bad guy is. Another way of losing it is forgetting how they move and how they work, like not seeing pattern recognition. You now have an Oklahoma pastors for Oklahoma's children or whatnot. When do you see the pattern recognition? Oh, we're in the middle of somebody's strategic plan. Yep. That's what this is. Oh, we're in the middle of, like, have some recognition of that. What did you learn? So let me ask you this. When you went into working for IDEA Public Schools, were you a charter person? Like, were you a convert and believed that it was the right thing to do? Or were you kind of like an every kind of school person? And what did you learn about the charter politics and the charter thing while you were there?
So, first I have to say, I've loved every opportunity to advocate for kids, but coming out of 3 years working at IDEA Public Schools, I actually feel blessed. Like, I got to work for what, it's sort of like a little under the radar nationally because so many IDEA schools are in Texas. But the people who teach at IDEA, the parents at IDEA, the alumni at IDEA, the superintendent, Joanne Gama, like, these are literally the best human beings you will meet. So I was always supportive of charter schools because I went to private school. So my parents had a choice. They got to, like, look, they got to, one, they had the financial means to buy a house in a nice neighborhood. And they looked around at the local public schools in Arlington, Virginia, and, they didn't think they were fit for me. They actually thought that I was too, like, naughty and, like, sassy and vivacious, and that I was going to get in trouble in the public schools because if I was bored, I would act up. So they had the privilege of picking a private school. And so I started volunteering at a KIPP charter school when I was a senior in high school. So I've always been supportive of charter schools because I've been supportive of policies that give parents more choices. So yeah, I was pretty, strongly, like, pro charter, pro choice, pro parent opportunity, parent power. But when I'd worked at ESFR from the student perspective and the sort of college students, young people. At DFR, I was more like working with the actual elected officials and on the electoral side. I never gotten to work directly with parents. And that when I went to IDEA, we didn't have like an organizing program or really anything in place that was helping parents to have power and, learn how to register to vote, go to a school board meeting, like contact your elected official, and so I worked with an amazing team of organizers at IDEA to work directly with our families and actually, parents, grandparents. One of our best advocates was great grandmother.
Wow.
And that is when I got to hear so many stories. I mean, IDEA is a big network, 63,000 students, actually now probably, I think 70,000 students. So getting to meet so many families in all over Texas in communities I'd never visited before. I'd never been to the Rio Grande Valley. That made choice so much more real for me because it had always been about, okay, I had choice, my parents had choice. From a value standpoint, I think that everyone deserves it. But then when I worked at IDEA, I was actually the people I was working with every day, were IDEA parents. So it made it so much more real for me.
I love that there's a good example too, because that's one of the things the movement can learn from. Authentic engagement of the parents. And I hate the word authentic because it just feels like it is or it isn't. You shouldn't call it an engagement if it's bad engagement or whatever. But I've heard this about IDEA public schools. So you going in, you were for choice generally because you have had it. Charters were one version of choice, but going to a successful charter network actually helped you, probably helped you kind of firm up on this is a good model of choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I saw at IDEA and where working with charter parents firmed me up so much was and gave me so much more conviction was this the power of having access to schools that are not tied to a boundary. We had parents who went to IDEA who lived across the street from IDEA. We had parents who drove their kid 30 minutes to go to IDEA. And there wasn't there's so much sort of deification of the neighborhood school. And I absolutely think every kid should have a great school in their neighborhood. At the same time, if for whatever reason you don't want to attend that school, if your parents find the school for you that fits you, that's 30 minutes away, I am not gonna stand in the way of that. And what I saw at IDEA was just the power of schools that are open to everyone. And that's also when I started reading, more or talking with my friend Connor Williams, who writes about educational redlining. You have spoken a lot about this. I absolutely think we should be pushing for more policies that that sort of end the link between housing segregation and sort of school boundaries.
Yeah, I think the reason we haven't done that yet, right? Because the one biggest sun in the middle of the educational universe of inequity is residential assignment,
Yes.
Assignment by residents. And you have to ask yourself, if it's like the sun and you're getting the light from it, that the sun exists, and you never ask yourself about the sun. That's in the middle of it. We talk about inequity all the time. We talk about equity in education all the time, but the most perfect manifestation of inequity in public education is before all of us all the time. It's residential assignment. So you have to ask yourself, how come we haven't changed that? Even in very blue places, in very liberal places, the places where they couldn't be more liberal, like the Twin Cities, which is basically Disneyland for liberals. And you have to ask yourself, why every time they have a discussion about the boundaries, all hell breaks loose? Like
Yep.
seriously, like all these like really super like, DNC contributors show up to say, no, you can change a lot of things, but don't change the boundaries. Like we bought our house based on the boundaries the way that they are right now, which makes me think people are phony. They're like they want equity, but only they want fake equity. They want something that's not real.
That's why it's so good. I mean, your show being called Unpublic, and like when someone tells me that they're against charter schools because they're for public schools, or they're against charter schools, or they're against, pods, or they're against families being able to homeschool their kids or whatever because they're for neighborhood schools, then I'm like, do you know that that system is not public? Like, do you understand that?
Yeah. Or do you understand when you say I am for neighborhood schools, you are saying
I'm for housing segregation.
I'm for housing segregation. I'm for educational redlining. I'm for the sorting of people so that they don't get the same opportunities. That's what you're saying. And you called it the deification of the neighborhood school. I think that's a great way to put it, because in neighborhoods where people generally live for 50 years or more, which tend to be houses and wealthier neighborhoods, I can see why they deify the neighborhood school, because it's part of their long-term mission to stay where they are. But in that's not the same in every neighborhood. As a matter of fact, neighborhoods turn over very quickly now in ways that they never used to in the past. Like the move in, move out factor. Like you're not knowing your neighbor, when their kid's a baby and then seeing their kid go to graduation. Like that's something that used to exist in some places. And the thing that drives that turnover faster is bad schools. So in places where the schools are known to be poor, the real estate turns over faster until it gentrifies. And then the school gets gentrified and then it stabilizes, right? So totally weird. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned DEFR. So for people watching who don't know what DEFR is, that's Democrats for Education Reform. Makes me think, what did you learn about politicians and politics?
God, don't ask.
I mean, I've learned a lot over time that disabused me of all of my kind of like romantic notions about what it's like to be an elected official. But like, what are the things that maybe kind of that shocked you maybe, or made you just kind of step back and go, really, that's how things work?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a good illustrative example. I mean, so I grew up, both of my parents were public servants, and they really viewed it that way. Government, my grandparents also public servants. Grandmother worked for the CIA. Cool grandma. She was a Russian analyst during the Cold War. My grandfather was military. So like growing up in DC and my parents working for the government and in different administrations, like my dad worked in the Clinton administration, then the Bush administration. I had a stuffed animal named Chelsea because it was named after Chelsea Clinton. So like I grew up with this idea that like public service was something to aspire to. That like servant leadership, like really serving people, going beyond partisanship, and that sort of almost spirit of, it shouldn't matter what political party you're with, or just doing the right thing, trying to make government better, trying to make government serve people better. So I was certainly like disabused of some of my rosier pictures of public service when I started doing, I think, like local politics with DEFR. Certainly met some amazing folks, brave elected officials. I have to call out someone who I got very close with and learned a lot from, which is former Mayor Vince Gray, who's now a council member in DC. And I think a very wise person, politically, he knows how to like play the game, but very guided by like serving his community. But I also met people who were sort of uninterested in like hearing from people affected by the education policies that they were making. And I also see on the DC Council, people running for DC Council, people who their main metric of their own success is like, do they pass some sort of like liberal purity test and sort of the progressive purity test, and are people cheering them on Twitter? So there is a local politics. I have never worked in Congress even though I live in DC, I've never worked in quote Washington. I've never worked on the Hill. But what I saw certainly I saw it in like some of the Texas state legislature, and I saw it in DC and see it in other places around the country, is like people who think that serving their constituents means like a lot of people agreeing with them on Twitter. Like, and the funny thing is, like, this has been literally, political scientists have like debunked this, that Twitter is not representative of the country. It's not representative actually of the Democratic Party. It's not representative even even in a very blue city like DC, where people are very engaged, it is still not representative. So if you're like, feeling like you did, there was a council member recently who, like, his big signature bill that the teachers union drafted for him was a 6-month study on education governance. And it was going to be like a commission and hearings and really like an opportunity. It was almost like setting up a little theater, a little auditorium for the teachers union to have like their performances. And he got like 80 retweets. And I just like, I can imagine thinking, him think like, I'm doing this awesome thing. Well, okay, we're literally in the middle of a pandemic. Kids are shut out of school. Like, DC has not opened our schools fast enough. We're having huge issues and challenges with reopening. And your like signature thing for like the whole year, for all of COVID, is like setting up an auditorium for the teachers union because you got 80 retweets.
I met somebody who was, I don't want to say too much. DC seems to be like a shameless, scandalous market for people that want to be Obama one day. And there were people that I met there that I had no idea were going to run for something other than what they were in, and they were in education. And once they decided they were going to run for city council, things changed. So their education platform changed, and suddenly it was just everything that the teachers union would want you to say. Like, we're for real schools and real choice and district schools and blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And it just became so performative that this is what I've learned about public officials, is the number that were like you mentioned your parents were, that really see public service in the old fashioned way, which was, it was service. It was public service. It was what you did, both as a job to serve your country and your community, and as a job. You did both, but you were doing the people's work. And what it's become now is a fast track way for people to have careers who have no other career. It used to be that there were people that had very profound careers and went and served the public using what they, whatever their expertise was. Now, you have people where that is their goal, is to be a politician. Yeah. Like, their goal is to be a politician. Like, I'm going to be a politician.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep trying to escalate up the chain of politicians. So that's my job now. I'm going to do school board, and then I'll get on the city council, and then maybe I'll make a failed run for mayor. But if somebody's seat opens up in the Senate or the House, I'm going to run for that too. And to win in that way, you really do need the teachers union. If that is going to be your long-term, if you're a Democrat, let me just put this differently. If you are a Democrat and you want to be Obama one day, it's probably in your best interest not to do what Obama did, which was be for school reforms and whatnot, but to just say whatever they want you to say.
Yep.
It's so ridiculous.
My hope is that I'm a very optimistic person in my nature. And my true hope is that can change for the Democratic Party. Or at least change in enough places or cities that you can start to look around and be like, well, Michael Bennett did it. Cory Booker did it, Barack Obama did it, but like doing more of that in places like DC, Denver, Minneapolis, LA, Oakland. The local, one thing I've seen is that it's a lot easier to be maybe the reason I named some US senators, it's a lot easier the way that like political capture and interest group capture works. It's a lot easier to be for kids and families and like what you believe in and sort of escape the grasp of interest groups in a larger, like the larger the district. So like there's a reason that there are more US senators and governors, Democratic governors, who are able to transcend sort of party orthodoxy. I'm not saying that's like in no way is that like every senator or governor, but I think it's a lot harder in sort of school board, city council, state legislature, these small districts, lower turnout, where, interest groups can say, we will control the narrative about your election. We will door knock. We will flyer. We will phone bank. So here's my hope. Like the work that we were doing at IDEA was, we never talked. We obviously nonpartisan. We're a charter school, 501c3. We didn't talk about like which candidates were better. But what we did do is a massive voter registration push that was taking some of the best practices around like voter enfranchisement work and applying them in our communities. A lot of our parents became what are called volunteer deputy registrars, where they could register other parents. We did like so many sort of what's on my ballot, like how do I okay, yeah, I know that the president is at the top of the ballot, but like what are all of these other positions? So I do think that the way forward is like we have to figure out how to have more of what like the awesome stuff that like Carrie Rodriguez is doing with like National Parents Union, like having a counterweight that is not just like DFER. Like I love DFER. I worked for DFER, but like DFER is grass tops and does great fundraising for Democrats who are pro kid. But we much more important than that is parents and students, 18-year-olds, college students. Obviously, that's for now called our turn. Registered to vote, actively engaged, going to school board meetings, figuring out who's good for kids.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important analysis of where we're at right now is that like we need feet. You can't have a body that's like all chest or all arms, no legs, no knees, no feet. And right now, I think that's growing. We've been understanding that for a while. Yeah, that's growing. I think you mentioned Carrie Rodriguez with the National Parents Union. I know here in Minnesota, we already had a Minnesota Parents Union that was, taking off. And I think philanthropists are starting to see over time that that's a better investment. The thing that you and I maybe talked a little bit about this, but the thing that I think is changing with philanthropists is they just didn't know how to quantify that before. That was the problem. The problem was they couldn't, fuel that movement because they couldn't figure out, well, what should the metrics be? Like, it was messy. How many one-on-ones did you do this week? And now I think some of them are starting to say, like, I don't even care what the metrics are as long as people are getting out there fighting for themselves. Like, we can't be fighting for everybody. You have to get out there and fight for yourselves. So I love it. Well, listen, as we wrap and we come towards the end, and I really appreciate you coming on today, do you have any final words about where you see this thing going in the future yourself, like what you care about moving forward? What's your biggest kind of audacious type of plan or goal for the future?
Oh, I should have seen this coming, that like your closing question would be like, what is your closing wisdom?
Or the thing that you care about most now. Like you've done all this other stuff. What do you care about now?
Well, I have to say, one thing I care about now. So I'm now advising a philanthropist, Catherine Bradley. We are going to be launching a sort of new venture focused on educational equity, economic opportunity, and justice. I think those things are connected. Not afraid to say that, we need kids to have great schools. We also need their parents to have access to good jobs. We need a justice system that is not broken and not racist. So I am very excited about working in those areas. I also, I guess for people who are on the advocacy side, like me, one thing that I do that I love is I volunteer as a tutor once a week, sometimes twice a week, sometimes a couple other times. I have a little group of students who are juniors in high school. And sometimes we schedule additional follow-up sessions. And that, it's such a cliche of stay connected to the work. People will say, oh, you're an advocate or you're in philanthropy, you got to stay connected to the work. I think that for people, like you, Chris, who are really blessed to have amazing children, you're connected because you have your own kids. My advice or something I care about as someone who doesn't yet have children, is just still taking that approach of servant leadership and viewing, doing some service where you actually see that kids first of all, kids are brilliant. Every child, it's something I see every time I tutor, is that every child is brilliant. And wow. That is, what do I care about is, I want every single elected official in the United States to say that every child is brilliant. I want every single elected official to say that every child deserves an education that works for them, where their brilliance can be unleashed. And I want advocates and philanthropists to, stay connected to that so that we can have that audacity. That's where the audaciousness comes from. Because when I talk to my high school juniors, they have huge dreams. They have huge dreams for what they want to accomplish in their life. And I just can't rest until I've done more to make sure that they can achieve those dreams.
Well, I think you're a bright star. So I appreciate you. For all time's sake, I'm thinking in my mind it was 2010 when we met.
Yep,
yeah, so I think it was 2010 when we met. And I met a lot of people through you in the work. I always thought it was really amazing that you had started this organization. You had co-founded an organization when you were still that young. And it was a real organization. And there were people that I was meeting through there that right now, Kulia Pringle is in the comments and she says, is that Catherine? Chris,
hi,
tell her I said hi.
Yeah. Latasha Gandhi, Kenneth, Evan.
Claire. Yeah. I met so many people through that group and eventually ended up on their board. And it's funny seeing Kulia right now in the messages because it just reminds me that I met Kulia through ESFR years ago. That's where I met her. So I expect great things from you. I mean, you started young and you've built so much in a short amount of time that it's fun to watch. It's really great to watch and see where it goes. For anybody watching, I've put Catherine's Twitter handle across the bottom if you want to reach out to her or if you want to just follow her and see what is going on in her life. This has been an hour with Catherine Bellinger, who was one of the co-founders of what was then ESFR and has now become Our Turn. She's also worked for DFR and for IDEA Public Schools and is now an advisor, a philanthropy advisor, focusing on educational opportunity. So one to watch, definitely. And I'm happy to call you a friend, Catherine. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Have a great rest.